All right, y'all. AM/FM, Radio Free Go-Go.
Good morning, DC. The brisk mornings have arrived in the capital city, and what better way to keep warm than the Capitol Hoop Caucus? I'm Wardell McCabe, and I'm joined, as always, by my two co-hosts. First is the Leonardo of the show. It's Isaac Ajicum Harris, and the man to his left is our Donatello? It's Troy Halliburton. Gentlemen, how are you feeling this week?
Come on, man. You know, this is a Raphael account over here, man. What we talking about?
Wow.
Raphael, yeah, come on, man.
You don't seem like that reckless, though.
Man,
I don't know. You don't got. You don't have a.
I think that's a compliment.
That is a compliment. I'm just like, that was wild, but okay.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Anyways, let me just continue last week's trend by asking you both a question for you both. What is a perfect song?
Under the Bridge by Red Hot Chili Peppers.
A song that has to be timeless. Some '90s dance also Biddy McLean. Yeah, damn. I forgot the song. Wow, I literally left it.
How perfect can it be?
You're right.
Don't do that to me. Don't do that to me. Oh, no.
Anyways, I personally would choose Ain't No Mountain High Enough by Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell. And the reason why it is that I'm asking you both this question is because you, our audience, the listeners, have texted in and you have made it pretty abundantly clear you want music. And, well, as you may have noticed over the past two episodes since we've been on YouTube, we have been using our licensed music. So that's music that we can't actually get cleared because on YouTube, there's all sorts of copyright laws that we do not want to infringe because, well, lawsuits. But what we can do is we can have licensed music on the radio and on the podcast. So that's what we're going to do. We'll be picking that back up. We'll have music that you all know and love, and it'll be on the podcast feed. So if you do miss that, please just know you can catch it on the audio medium. You can't catch it on the visual side because, again, YouTube is pretty stingy that way. But just know you are able to hear it, and you're able to hear it somewhere else. But this isn't a music show. We are a basketball show. Isn't that right, Troy?
That's exactly right, Wardell. We are the Capitol Hoop Caucus on our way to becoming the most listened to and viewed basketball show in the DMV area where we talk about hoops on every level from high school all the way up to the pros, men's and women's. You know, if they're bouncing that orange ball, we're covering it.
Absolutely, and you can, of course, listen to us every Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern on ESPN 630. That's on your local AM radio dials. But as I also mentioned, you can listen to us on the podcast feed, wherever it is you get your podcasts. Don't believe me? Then just open up your favorite podcasting app, search up Capitol Hoop Caucus, and I promise you, we'll be right there. And as I also mentioned, we are now on YouTube. So when you have a chance, head on over there and give us a like and subscribe because it really helps to grow the show. But enough of that chatter. Let's get on to today's show. The Mystics season just ended, so not only are we going to give you an update on how their final week went, but we'll also be reviewing their season as a whole and what our thoughts were on how they finished the year, what they could have done better or just differently in general, and how they surprised us, what their path ahead could be. And that's not all, though, because, there's also some Wizards news to get through. Some injury news that stems from the FIBA Eurobasket. Not just Alex Sarr, but there's another player who just had a surgery there that we'll have to talk about. After that, we'll circle back to the Mystics because, since the season ended, we've got one more scouting report for the year, and this one will be all-encompassing. It'll be a few more players than what we usually do, and it'll be a grade for their entire season, not just since the last time we checked in with you all. But after that, hey, the AP, they just released their award winners for the WNBA regular season, so we'll talk about who it is they selected and how we would have made some different selections there. And elsewhere, we'll continue grading the off-seasons around the association. This week, we'll be focusing on the Atlantic Division. And then to close things out, we'll have trivia time for the line. But first, as always, let's kick things off with the Beltway Beat. We're going to kick things off here with the Washington Mystics. As I said, their season just ended, and they had one final week of action since the last time we checked in with you all. And let's just go through that game by game. started out with a 65-94 loss to Indiana on Sunday, September 7th, a game that Isaac was actually at. That was their last home game of the season, and they followed that up with a 66-75 loss at New York on Tuesday. These two games brought their losing streak to 10 games to close out the season, most of which they weren't really in contention to win. Isaac, as I said, you were there at the final home game against Indiana. What did you see on the floor, and what went wrong for Washington?
They got out physical. I think Indiana came out ready to play as a playoff game. They treated it as a playoff game. They didn't, hold dial back. They were like, nope, we're going to act like we're in the playoffs. We're going to play like it's a playoff game. So the refs kind of gave them a lot of room for contact, and I think the Mystics didn't prepare for that ultimately because although they did show some fight later in the second half, they literally got punched in the mouth and they couldn't find a way to recover.
Well, and I think that's probably the tail of the tape for each of the last 10 games. Troy, what do you think, to a larger extent, has gone wrong with the team over this last 10-game stretch?
I think that they really got caught up in a talent deficit. So, I think that, when we looked at the Mystics coming into the season, when they had a 14.5 win total, I think that, them overperforming at the beginning of the season kind of, put the expectations a little bit higher than what they probably should have been. And at the end of the day, their overall lack of talent and depth on the roster eventually caught up to them. And so, what Isaac's talking about with that Indiana Fever game, the Fever, they treated it like a playoff game because they're actually in the playoffs, and their playoff seeding, was still up in the air as far as where they would be. So that game meant a lot more to them. Whereas the Mystics, I'm sure their players were already booking their offseason travel plans. So I think it's just two totally different perspectives. And so, I think their overall lack of talent and depth on the team eventually just caught up with them.
Yeah, I think they maybe hit a spot of self-realization, right? For the majority of this season, it felt like the Mystics could be characterized by their heart in each game. It's why so many of their games were decided between two possessions. And that seemed to completely fade away down the stretch. As you said, the reality started to set in that they weren't really going to make the playoffs. And I think you could see they were playing a lot of teams who were making the playoffs, who were in tightly seeded spots in the playoffs, who really needed to win those games. And I think that just kind of that was the difference maker there. And as you said, talent was also pretty key from that too. We keep circling back to this, but they made pretty big moves at the trade deadline. They made it known what their path was going to be. And well, it was felt. And now that their season is concluded at 16-28, as we've said, they missed the playoffs. So I think it's probably time we try to review the season as a whole. Troy, what are your thoughts on this season?
I think that this moves the needle forward for the franchise and what their goals were coming into the season. For them to be in playoff contention for 3/4 of the year. The last 10 games has been very rough to kind of watch and process. But I think that when you look at the fact that this was the youngest team in the WNBA, and they have two players who are going to be probably named to the all rookie team, I think that the future is very bright. And this season is just I don't know. It's really just a path on the ability towards getting back to where they were in 2019, and it's just going to be a rebuilding process.
I think the best way to describe the season and to piggyback on Troy is that it's a rebuilding year. One of the quotes I like to look at and think about is that there's more lessons than losses. So these losses show these growing pains. And you see some areas of improvement for your young core and trying to, figure out the chemistry on how do you move forward from this? You had two players that didn't lose a lot of college basketball games when they were drafted, Sonia Citron and Kiki Arif, and they were 500 most of their college career. So this is the first time they've felt some adversity, and it's part of that growing with that. In my opinion, I don't think the trades helped. So one of the trades did not help their growth a little bit. They had someone they probably could have grown with. But when you look at the season as a whole, it's a lot more lessons than losses, and these lessons will turn into something valuable later on and for the long haul.
Yeah, I think what a common thread here is that everyone is saying there's a lot of positive things to take away from this. And Troy, you had noted what the Vegas odds were for their record this year. They finished above that. And so would you then also say that, I know you said that they moved the needle forward. Would you say that their timeline has been fast-tracked compared to what we thought it would be at the start of the season?
No, I think that if you are, Jamila Wyman and Michael Winger, and you're running the Mystics organization, they're probably directly on the timeline that they expected. I think that fans probably wanted to fast track what the timeline is going to be, and I think that part of the reason why they made the moves that they did was to kind of temper expectations and to put fans on notice that this is going to be a very thoughtful process. They aren't just going to throw the team together and throw players together. They're going to be putting a lot of thought and due diligence into how they construct this team, and that it's going to be a process. So yeah, no, I think that what we as fans had to temper our expectations based on how they started the season, but I think that the timeline is directly in line with what the people who are running the operation want.
Oh, for sure. And they are making heavy assessments on the entire roster as a whole, and two players that they've really assessed the entire franchise around now are those two rookies, but it's not just rookie players that they've had on their team. Isaac, they've had themselves a new head coach. How would you think he fared this year?
I think he did good for year one. For year one, I think it's not a race or a rush with him. Coach Johnson did a good job with what he had, and he tried to get to the players' strengths and tried to build the team to the best he can. I think there was a couple adjustments that he needed to make as a coach, but you can tell that this is his first time in this capacity coaching for this organization. But I have no complaints with him. He's the right coach for this team.
Yeah, I think Sidney Johnson had a decent year coaching. I do have some bits of concern for his rotations with some of the players and how he was using some of the players. I think that some of his inexperience showed in critical moments throughout the season, and you just never know. Like if they're able to win some of those games earlier in the year that that they maybe should have won, then maybe they finish out the season differently than what they did. I think that it was a learning experience for him as a first time head coach in the WNBA, and so I think for him it was a building process for him to kind of get a feel for the WNBA game, and so I would definitely be looking towards next year to see some levels of improvement in those areas from Coach Sidney Johnson.
Well, what's helpful for him is this past season, he definitely had a lot of opportunities to go through those learning curves. We mentioned it before. They've had a lot of games that were really close at the start of the season, and even a few toward the end of the season, which meant that he had a lot of opportunities to experiment with the lineups and the rotations. And I think that struggle was a little bit more obvious in this last 10 games. Obviously, they lost them all, so it becomes a little bit more glaring. But as Troy said, that could very well be chalked up to a talent issue. They were just overwhelmed by their opposition in terms of talent. And so maybe it's just that he had some holes on the roster that he couldn't plug with the players he had available. And with that, I now ask, Isaac, I'll pose this to you first. What were their biggest holes this season?
The biggest hole this year was finding a stable point guard and trying to keep a stable point guard healthy or in just the right position to help everyone score and contribute. Just based off the way he's coaching, they needed someone that can do it two-way. So it did hurt when J.C. Sheldon got hurt toward the end of the year and we didn't get to see how she kind of meshes. So someone like that is the biggest glaring hole.
Troy, I'll ask you the same question.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about that glaring hole at the point guard position for the entirety of the season. But I also would like to look at the backup big position. I know we're going to talk about, some of these players later on and in the scouting report, but I think that the Mystics, when you look at rim protection and how they were able to not really stop anybody from getting to the basket, I think that was a major problem for them for this season and something I would definitely address in the offseason.
Well, speaking of the offseason, they're going to have to make a lot of really serious decisions because they've got a lot of free agents coming up. They've had some unrestricted free agents, one of whom is the recently acquired, or I guess reacquired, Alicia Clark and Stephanie Dolson, the backup big. And on their restricted free agent list, they have Emily Enksler, they've got Jade Melbourne, Madison Scott, Shug Sutton, and then also Shakira Austin. Man, we never want to have these conversations, but Troy, what is the likelihood that all or even half of these players are brought back next year.
Well, I think the likelihood that all of them are going to be brought back is very, very low. Even half, I think, I would say that would probably be very low too. The one player that I think that we can probably safely say will be back is Shakira Austin, which the front office has already come out and said that she is a part of the team's future plans. And with her being a restricted free agent, that means that they have the option to match whatever offer, even if she goes out and gets another one from another team. But you really have to look at the fact that, okay, Jamila Wyman and Michael Winger really kind of, just took over the franchise last summer. And so this will be like their kind of first, heading into the offseason, like just with their ideas as far as who they would want on the roster. And they have this, bit of data from this year and saying, what exactly they were weak at and what they could be possibly good at. So I think that they're going to go out and try to bring in their own players that will fit this system that they're trying to build. So, yeah, a lot of those names that you listed off will probably not on the Mystics roster next season.
Oh, yeah. I mean, a big reason why is they've got a lot of draft picks in this upcoming draft.
Hey, come on, exactly. They've got 3 first-round draft picks coming up. So, literally, there aren't enough roster spots for them. So, they're going to be people who are going to be put up for for the expansion draft. So, there's going to be a lot of different mechanisms that will cause the fluctuation of players coming in and out. So I would expect to see almost a totally new cast of characters besides the core 3 of, the 2 rookies and Shakira Austin.
Absolutely. Another one, too, is that salary cap going to start skyrocketing pretty soon. And so, I think this team probably wants to position themselves with their core 3 to angle for another big player to come through. But let's briefly circle up to the draft. As I mentioned, they have a lot of draft picks coming up in this upcoming draft. Troy said they've got 3 first-round picks. They not only have their own first-round pick, but they also have Seattle's, and they have the right to swap for New York's first-round pick, and that was acquired in the trade with Connecticut earlier this season. In the second round, they have their own pick, and along with Minnesota's second-round pick, and in the third round, they have their own pick as well. So a lot of picks are accumulating for this team. Troy, you said there's limited roster spots there. So, I don't even know that all these draft picks can come onto this team. Isaac, my question to you is, do you think that Washington come draft night actually has all these picks on hand, or do you think they try to maneuver some of these picks and move up in the draft or maybe for another player?
I think they might maneuver a little bit. I think this draft class is very interesting because there's a lot of good players that they could see that fill those holes that they want. So I can see them moving up if there's someone in particular that they really want and they like and, that fits what they want to build.
Well, I don't know. I think that when you look at what they did in last year's draft, I think that they want as many bites at the apple as they could possibly get. And so, but also this really has to depend on what happens in the WNBA draft lottery. So, they might not have to. We could end up with the number 1 pick. Mm-hmm. So, I think that, but right now, I would believe that Jamila Wyman and Michael Winger are doing their due diligence on college basketball players and trying to bring in 3 good players in the first round. And then, we'll see what happens with those later round picks, the second and third round picks. But, the 3 first round picks, I think that they really would like to bring in 3 more quality players to add with the 3 they drafted last year. So now they have a core of half their team right there in the last 2 drafts.
Oh, yeah. And, man, I think what's tough for us here as fans of the team is it's a long wait, even for the draft lottery. You said, Troy, they're going to have to keep a vigilant eye on the college basketball season. That hasn't even started yet. There's still a whole college basketball season to get through. There's still Unrivaled to get through. There's a whole lot to get through before we actually know what this team can even direction-wise go toward. And so it's just a game of patience, which I struggle with. I know everyone at home probably struggles with too. We just got to play the waiting game. But some things in the more immediate future is obviously their offseason begins now, and I guess my question to you both, what would you say is the biggest question you have for this team that you want to see answered throughout this offseason? Isaac, I'll start with you.
The biggest question, I want to see who's going to be the point guard and if Georgia Amore is your point guard of the future. Like we said, there's a lot of draft picks in here. We don't know if everyone's going to stay in here. It's presumed that Georgia will be, this point guard next year. But if they see someone else they like and Georgia's staying here in the offseason, like, you know what, maybe we should let her roll or try to trade her for somebody. I'm not sure. But that's my biggest question is if Georgia is the point guard of the future.
My biggest question would be what they would want to do with some of that cap space that they have. So, I know that we're talking about, who's going to be returning, but, I think that the Mystics are putting themselves in a position to be big players in WNBA free agency. And so, if they can go out there and get a big time player to come in here and that might be the thing that will expedite this rebuilding process.
Yeah, I think for me personally, it's how soon can they re-sign Austin? Because with her being a restricted free agent, do we want to allow her to hit that open market and then you have to match whatever it is that she's offered? Because this is when that cap inflates, and she is the best free agent available that's currently on this roster, right? She's the best player that's hitting free agency, and she might get a pretty significant offer, and that may affect the direction of the team. Who's to say? But that's our Mystics for the time being, coverage for right now. We will circle back on them a little bit later with the scouting report. Let's quickly go over to the Washington Wizards because, we got to close out the Beltway beat. And I said it earlier, they've had players participating in FIBA Eurobasket. Let's first start with France, who was eliminated on Sunday, September 7th, in the round of 16 against the country of Georgia. That score was 70-80. We also noted last week that Sarr was ruled out for the remainder of the tournament due to injury, and it unfortunately seems that he wasn't alone. On Fridays, news broke that Bilal Coulibaly had undergone surgery to repair a ligament tear in his right thumb, an injury he sustained during his play at Eurobasket. That news coming from ESPN's Shams Charania. Troy, how serious is this injury, and how much time is Coulibaly expected to miss?
Well, I think that the injury is very serious. Anytime you go under the knife is very serious. And then the thing is that it's happening directly right before the training camp and the season's getting ready to start. So we're talking about Bilal Coulibaly, who's heading into his third year. And this is, the third year is really kind of like the biggest year for young players' development in the NBA. This is usually the year where you see players take that, that big leaps in their games. And so for him to miss training camp going into his third year, for him to, they say he's going to be out, at the beginning of the regular season, I think that this definitely is a major setback for him in his career. And, I just have a lot of questions because – I think that a lot of people, we were talking about Bilal Coulibaly's his play in Eurobasket and why it seemed to be so down, and now we may have an answer as to why that was. But my thing is, when did he get hurt? Like, because if he got hurt and he was still playing through the injury, then like that's kind of an issue for me with the French national team. It's like, if this guy has a torn ligament in his thumb, like he should have been shut down before they were putting him out there, and he's scoring 0 points in games, and so. I think that Bilal Coulibaly, for me, his development is very critical for this season. And just to have him, be behind the 8 ball heading into the season before it even starts is kind of concerning for me.
Oh, it definitely is. And I mean, we were talking about last week with Alex Sarr's injury. We had heaped praise on the French national team for sitting Sarr for the rest of the tournament because we're like, all right, it's great that they're showing and taking caution with the player's future and his career. And to have this be the opposite effect for Coulibaly is very worrisome. I mean, you wonder, was there an internal pressure to try to win something and they couldn't really take the loss of another NBA caliber player from their squad? That could very well be true. And as to when he got hurt, shout out to Varun Shankar of the Washington Post. He actually had a post on X earlier, and he noticed that Bilal's hand was heavily taped for France's game on August 31st, which is exactly when his level of performance dipped. So he had 2 games ahead of that. And for the 2 games ahead of that, he had averaged 12.5 points per game and 15.5 rebounds per game, shooting 52% from the field and 72% from 3. And each of the 4 games after that is when you saw that dive. That's the games that he had his hand taped up, and the numbers back that up. He fell to 3.2 points per game and 3.75 rebounds per game, shooting below 30% from the field. So that seems to be exactly when it is that he got hurt, and why it is that France kept him in there, I honestly have no idea.
I think it was a player stubbornness that kept him in there, not just France, because if they were quick to shut down Alex Sarr, I feel like Bilal's like, no, I want to play, I want to show and try to prove that he can play through it, even though it probably wasn't the best idea for him. And that's the biggest risk when you play in these tournaments representing your country. Although you are doing it, there's a risk of saying, hey, man, you still have your day job to return to when you come back. So, I mean, yes, it's heroic and courageous that Bilal tried to play through it, but it wasn't a smart business move. And France should have just said, hey, look, whatever pride or stubbornness you got going on, you're going to sit.
Yeah, and this is an injury, as was already said earlier, it's going to sideline him for the entire duration of training camp, all likelihood, and possibly part of the beginning of the season. It's not great for the Wizards, and it is going to be interesting to see how this lineup shapes up for the actual opening day of the league. But elsewhere for the Wizards, Tristan Vukcevic also was playing in Eurobasket, but for Team Serbia. And like France, they were also eliminated in the round of 16 after losing to Finland last Saturday, 86-92. Bit of a random upset there if you're me as a Nuggets fan. But anyways, Vukcevic didn't play a single minute in that game, so I guess it really doesn't matter. There's nothing to assess there. All right, it's time for us to take our first break. The next time you hear us, we'll launch this week's scouting report to grade the individual seasons of the Washington Mystics. This is the Capital Hoop Caucus on ESPN 630 and the ESPN 630 app.